Hello everyone, and welcome to the Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Naruto was a sage whose life force could heal a Stellaron Scars Naruto x Himeko, Honkai, Star Rail. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Sage of the Silent Star. The silence of Hypno's IV was not an absence of sound, but a presence. It was a heavy, profound quiet that had long ago consumed the echoes of birdsong, the rustle of leaves in the wind, and the murmur of life. It was a silence born of a scar, a wound not upon the flesh of the world, but etched into its very soul. This was the peace of the tomb, a stillness that preceded the final, inevitable decay. At the epicenter of this wound, where reality itself had been warped and torn by the cancerous touch of a Stellaron, a lone figure sat in quiet contemplation. His name was Naruto Uzumaki, though that name had not been spoken by another living being in centuries. He sat cross-legged at the heart of a petrified forest, the once great trees now twisted into gray stone-like effigies of their former selves. Their stony bark was covered in a faint, sickly violet luminescence, a telltale sign of the Stellaron's lingering corruption. Yet, around Naruto, a perfect circle of vibrant life pushed back against the encroaching desolation. A patch of emerald green grass, soft and lush, flourished beneath him. A single, defiant sapling, its leaves a brilliant, healthy green, grew steadily beside his knee, its nascent life a stark rebellion against the sterile landscape. This small oasis of vitality, no larger than a few meters in diameter, was a testament to the power radiating from the man at its center. He appeared to be a man in his late 20s, though his eyes, a deep and startling sapphire blue, held the weight of ages. They were calm, observant, and carried a profound, almost weary wisdom. His spiky blonde hair, a shade brighter than the sun of his long-lost world, was the only truly vibrant color in the desolate landscape, save for his small sanctuary. He wore simple, durable clothing, dark, practical trousers tucked into sturdy boots, and a form-fitting, high-collared black shirt that did little to hide the powerful, lean musculature of a warrior in his prime. Over this, he wore a sleeveless, high-collared white haori, the fabric bearing a subtle, intricate pattern of interlocking rings. The coat was old but impeccably maintained, its edges frayed not from neglect, but from the passage of countless years. Hidden beneath the fabric, on the skin of his back, were the 9 tomo and the distinct, circular symbol of the Sage of Six Paths. Marks he had carried for so long they felt as much a part of him as his own bones. He had been on Hypno's IV for 3 standard galactic years. He had arrived via a method he could not explain, a sudden, violent tearing of the veil between worlds that had deposited him on this dying planet. He had found a world already in its death throes, the Stellaron's influence having long since silenced its civilizations and mutated its flora and fauna into crystalline monstrosities. For 3 years, he had sat here, at the very heart of the corruption, patiently pouring his own life force, his own unique energy, into the wounded planet. It was a slow, arduous process, like trying to fill an ocean with a single cup. He was not merely healing the physical damage, he was mending the very concept of life on this world. Coaxing the planetary life force, its natural energy, as he knew it, back from the brink. The small circle of green around him was the first fruit of his labor, a sign that the world was not yet truly dead. His senses, honed by a lifetime of war and a mastery of sage arts that transcended anything his own world had ever known, were a part of the planet itself. He could feel the tectonic plates shifting miles below, the whisper of solar winds in the ionosphere, the slow, agonizing pulse of the planet's dying heart. And it was with these senses that he detected something new, something alien. It was a subtle disturbance at first, a ripple in the fabric of space-time at the edge of the solar system. It was not a natural phenomenon. It was controlled, deliberate. A vessel. He had encountered other space-faring travelers in his long, solitary journey between worlds, but they were rare. Most ships gave this system a wide berth, their sensors warning them of the dangerous energies emanating from the planet. But this vessel was different. It did not shy away. It was making a direct course for Hypno's IV. Naruto's placid expression did not change. He remained seated, his hands resting on his knees, his breathing slow and even. He did not perceive any immediate hostility from the approaching vessel, only a powerful sense of curiosity. He continued his quiet meditation, his energy flowing into the ground, nurturing the nascent life around him, and waited. Aboard the Astral Express, the atmosphere was one of focused intrigue. Alarms were not blaring, but a palpable sense of alertness filled the main car of the train as it hurtled through the void of space. The express itself was a marvel, a crimson and gold locomotive that sailed the celestial seas, its V.Y. existence a defiance of conventional physics. It was a place of warmth, of polished wood and soft lighting, a sanctuary that traveled through the cold, indifferent dark. Himeko stood before the large, ornate central table, her back straight, her expression a mixture of scientific fascination and practiced caution. A long-stemmed glass of her favorite dark roast coffee sat untouched beside a holographic projection of Hypno's IV. Her long, auburn hair cascaded down her back, a stark contrast to her crisp, white and black professional attire. As the train's navigator and resident scientific genius, it was her job to analyze the anomalies the Express encountered on its trailblazing journey. And Hypno's IV was one of the most significant anomalies she had ever seen. "The energy readings are off the charts," she announced, her voice calm and measured, carrying easily through the spacious car. "We detected the signature of a Stellaron in this system decades ago. By all accounts, this world should be a dead husk, completely saturated with its corrupting influence. But our deep-range scans are showing something impossible." She gestured to the hologram. It depicted the planet, a swirling sphere of gray and sickly violet. But at one point on its surface, a single, tiny pinprick of pure, golden-white light pulsed with a steady, rhythmic beat, like a heart. "This energy signature," Himeko continued, zooming in on the point of light, is actively counteracting the Stellaron's influence. "It's not canceling it out, not overpowering it, it's healing it. It's mending the damage on a fundamental, conceptual level. I've never seen anything like it." Across from her, Welt Yong, a man of quiet authority and worldly experience, stroked his chin, his gaze fixed on the hologram. "A natural phenomenon?" he queried, his voice a low, thoughtful rumble. "Unlikely," Himeko replied, shaking her head. "The energy is too focused, too deliberate. It's being actively directed. And what's more, its output has been constant, without fluctuation, for at least the past 3 years since it first became detectable from this range." A new voice, chipper and full of youthful energy, piped up. "So, you're saying there's someone down there, on a planet that's supposed to be a cosmic graveyard?" It was March 7th, the Express's eternally cheerful and amnesiac archer, her pink and blue eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. Dan Heng, leaning against a nearby wall with his arms crossed, his expression as stoic as ever, offered his own concise analysis. "If there is someone down there, they are either incredibly powerful, or incredibly foolish. Perhaps both," Welt mused. "Himeko, what's our approach?" Himeko took a thoughtful sip of her coffee, the rich, dark aroma a familiar comfort. "We proceed with caution. We'll land the Express a safe distance from the energy source and approach on foot." "March, Dan Heng, you're with me. Welt, you have the con." Her eyes sparkled with an intellectual fire that was impossible to miss. A mystery of this magnitude was, to her, an irresistible lure. The chance to discover a new law of physics, a new form of energy, it was the very reason she had restored the Astral Express in the first place. The landing was smooth, the Astral Express settling into a cratered, desolate valley several kilometers from the petrified forest. The moment the doors hissed open, the oppressive silence of Hypno's IV washed over them. The air was thin, cold, and carried a faint, metallic taste. There was no wind, no distant animal calls, only the soft hum of the Express's life support systems behind them. "Creepy," March 7th whispered, her breath fogging in the cold air as she scanned the gray, lifeless landscape with her bow held at a low ready. Dan Heng, his cloud-piercer spear held firmly in one hand, was already a few steps ahead, his keen eyes scanning for any sign of movement. "The corruption is strong here. Be on your guard." Himeko, for her part, had a multi-purpose scanner in her hand, her gaze flicking between its readings and the horizon. "The source is that way," she said, pointing towards a ridge of jagged, crystalline rock formations. "The energy readings are stable. No signs of hostility. Their journey through the petrified forest was an eerie experience. The stone trees loomed over them like silent, twisted sentinels. The ground crunched under their boots, a mixture of petrified soil and violet crystals. They encountered several crystalline monstrosities, former fauna of the planet now turned into mindless, aggressive puppets of the Stellaron. Each time, the creatures were dispatched with practiced efficiency. Dan Heng was a whirlwind of precise, deadly spear thrusts, while March 7th's ice arrows froze the creatures in their tracks before they could get close. Himeko provided tactical support, her briefcase drone deploying targeted laser strikes. Through it all, they noticed something strange. The closer they got to the energy source, the less aggressive the creatures became. Some even seemed to shy away from them, retreating into the petrified woods as if sensing a power that dwarfed their own corrupted nature. Finally, they reached the crest of the ridge and looked down. The sight that greeted them brought all three of them to a halt. Below, in a perfectly circular clearing, was a scene of impossible life. A man with hair like spun gold sat in a patch of vibrant green grass, a single, healthy sapling growing beside him. He was the source of the golden white light they had seen from orbit, a gentle, calming aura that pulsed in time with his slow, rhythmic breathing. He was the eye of the storm, an island of serene vitality in an ocean of death. He had not moved since they crested the ridge. He simply sat there, his eyes closed, seemingly oblivious to their presence. Yet, they had the distinct feeling that he was aware of their every move, their every breath. Incredible, Himeko breathed, her scientific mind struggling to process the scene. The readings on her scanner were going haywire, unable to classify the energy radiating from the man. It was life force, pure and simple, but on a scale she had never imagined possible. March 7th lowered her bow slightly. He's just sitting there. Do you think he's friendly? We're about to find out, Dan Heng said, his grip on his spear unwavering. Himeko took the lead, her footsteps slow and deliberate as she descended into the clearing. She stopped a respectful distance away, her companions fanning out behind her. The man did not stir. Hello, Himeko called out, her voice clear and steady, though it seemed to her an intrusion on the profound silence. My name is Himeko. We're from the Astral Express. We detected an unusual energy signature from your location. We mean you no harm. For a long moment, there was no response. Then, slowly, the man's sapphire blue eyes opened. They were not the eyes of a madman, or a hermit driven insane by solitude. They were clear, intelligent, and held a depth that seemed to see right through her. He looked at each of them in turn, at March's youthful exuberance, at Dan Heng's stoic vigilance, and finally, his gaze settled on Himeko. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. The Astral Express, he said, his voice surprisingly deep and resonant, yet soft, as if he hadn't used it in some time. A curious name for a vessel that rides the stars. He spoke the galactic common tongue with a fluency and clarity that was unexpected. You have come a long way. Please, there is no need for caution. The creatures of this forest will not bother you here. Himeko was taken aback by his calm, articulate response. You knew we were coming. I felt your arrival, he replied simply. Just as I feel the slow, painful pulse of this world. He gestured to the petrified landscape around them. This place has been sick for a very long time. It's the Stellaron, March 7th interjected, stepping forward slightly. The cancer of all worlds. It does this to every planet it touches. The man's gaze shifted to her. Stellaron, he repeated the word, tasting it. An apt name. I have encountered similar afflictions before, though they went by other names. A cosmic sickness that feeds on life. You've seen this before, Himeko asked, her curiosity piqued. Who are you? How are you doing this? She gestured to the oasis of life around him. The man considered her question for a moment. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, he said, the name feeling strange on his own tongue after so long. As for how, I am sharing my life force with this world. Encouraging it to heal itself. Sharing your life force. Himeko's scientific mind reeled. The concept was absurd, a violation of every known principle of thermodynamics and biology. An organism could not simply share its life force on a planetary scale. The energy expenditure would be astronomical, fatal in an instant. Yet, The evidence was right before her eyes. It is a skill I acquired a long time ago, Naruto said, his gaze distant for a moment, as if looking back across an ocean of time. I am a sage. I am connected to the natural energy of the worlds I inhabit. This one is weak, but not yet gone. I am simply reminding it how to live. Dan Heng, ever the pragmatist, spoke up. This sharing of yours. It is what we detected from orbit. You have been doing this non-stop for 3 years. It was not a question, but a statement of fact. Naruto's eyes met Dan Heng's, and for a moment, a silent understanding passed between the two men. Time passes differently when one is in communion with a world, he said cryptically. But yes, it has been some time. Himeko stepped closer, her caution giving way to an all-consuming need to understand. Mr. Uzumaki, Naruto, the energy you're wielding, it's unlike anything I've ever recorded. It seems to operate outside the known laws of physics. Would you be willing to help us understand it? Naruto looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the brilliant mind behind her eyes, the insatiable curiosity, the passion for knowledge. He also saw a deep-seated weariness, the burden of leadership and the weight of a long, and perhaps lonely, journey. He recognized a kindred spirit, in a way. I can try to explain, he said, his voice gentle. But my understanding of it is intuitive, not scientific. It is the energy of life itself, a power that flows through all living things. I simply learned to harness it. As he spoke, he reached out and gently touched the small sapling beside him. As his fingers made contact, the sapling responded with an impossible burst of growth. In a matter of seconds, it grew from a tiny sprout into a small, healthy tree, its branches unfurling with vibrant green leaves. Its bark strong and supple. A single, perfect white blossom bloomed at its very top. March 7th gasped, her eyes wide with wonder. Dan Heng's stoic facade cracked for a fraction of a second, his eyes widening in disbelief. Himeko was speechless, her scanner clattering from her nerveless fingers to the soft grass below. She had just witnessed a miracle, a complete in utter defiance of the natural order. Naruto looked up at them, his faint smile returning. As I said, he continued, as if what he had just done was the most natural thing in the world, I am simply reminding it how to live. Himeko knelt down and picked up her scanner, her mind racing. This man, this sage, was not just a powerful individual. He was a living paradox, a force of nature in human form. His ability to heal the scars of a Stellaron, it was something the galaxy had been searching for, praying for eons. It was a power that could change everything. Naruto, she said, our voice filled with a newfound intensity. The Astral Express, we travel the stars, helping worlds that have been afflicted by Stellarons. But our methods are limited. We can contain them, remove them. But we cannot heal the damage they leave behind. Not like you can. She looked him directly in the eyes, her own gaze unwavering. We need you. The galaxy needs you. I know it is a lot to ask of a stranger, but will you join us? Travel with us. Help us heal the scars that the Stellarons have left on the universe. Naruto looked at the earnest, pleading expression on Himeko's face. He looked at the hopeful, wondrous gaze of March 7th, and the quiet, assessing stare of Dan Heng. For centuries, he had wandered alone, a silent guardian of dying worlds, a ghost from a forgotten past. He had accepted his solitude, his endless, lonely vigil. But now, here was a chance for something different. A chance for companionship. A chance to use his power not just to mend one world at a time, but to be ing hope to countless worlds across the sea of stars. He thought of the long years of peace in his own world, a peace he had fought so hard to achieve. He thought of his friends, his family, all long gone, their faces now just faint. Bittersweet memories. He had been alone for so long. Perhaps it was time that changed. He looked at the small, healthy tree he had just grown, a symbol of life's resilience. Then he looked back at Himeko, and the weariness in his ancient eyes seemed to lift, replaced by a spark of something new. A spark of purpose. You are not asking me to be a savior, he said, his voice soft but firm. You are asking me to be a trailblazer. To help chart a new path for the future. Himeko nodded, a small, hopeful smile gracing her lips. Yes, that's exactly it. Naruto rose to his feet in a single fluid motion. He was taller than he appeared sitting down, with a presence that was both commanding and reassuring. The golden-white aura around him pulsed once, then receded into him. As if he had drawn a deep breath. The small circle of green grass remained, a vibrant scar of life on the face of the dead world. He looked up at the violet-tinged sky of Hypno's IV. Then back at the three travelers from the stars. Very well, Himeko of the Astral Express, he said, his voice resonating with a newfound resolve. I will join you on your journey. It has been a long time since I had traveling companions. He offered them a genuine, warm smile, a smile that seemed to momentarily push back the oppressive gloom of the petrified world. I believe this will be interesting. Himeko's smile widened, a genuine, radiant expression of relief and excitement. March 7th cheered, her infectious enthusiasm a stark contrast to the somber environment. Even Dan Heng offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod of approval. As they turned to leave the clearing, Himeko paused and looked back at Naruto. There's just one thing I need to know, she said, a hint of playful curiosity in her tone. That coffee you mentioned earlier, what kind do you like? Naruto chuckled, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to chase away the last vestiges of the planet's oppressive silence. I've been drinking nutrient paste for the last 3 years, he replied, his eyes twinkling with a hint of humor. At this point, I'll take anything you've got. As the four of them walked back towards the distant, waiting silhouette of the Astral Express, a single, healthy green leaf from the newly grown tree detached itself from its branch and drifted down, landing softly on the petrified ground. And where it landed, a tiny, almost invisible speck of green began to grow. The healing of Hypno's IV had begun, and the journey of the Sage of the Silent Star had just taken a new, unexpected turn. The universe was about to learn that even the deepest scars could be healed, and that the will of a single, determined soul could be as powerful as the stars themselves. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Echoes of a Frozen World. The transition from the profound, deathly silence of Hypno's IV to the gentle, rhythmic hum of the Astral Express was a balm to Naruto's senses. For 3 years, the only constant sound had been the agonizingly slow pulse of a dying world. Now, he was surrounded by the subtle symphony of life and technology in harmony, the soft thrum of the star rail core, the faint whisper of the air recyclers, the distant, comforting clink of Himeko preparing a fresh pot of coffee in the main car. He had spent centuries in solitude, but he was not, by nature, a solitary creature. He had been forged in the crucible of camaraderie, his strength drawn from the bonds he shared with others. This gentle hum of activity was a welcome ghost of a life he thought he had left behind forever. He sat in the passenger car, a simple, steaming mug held carefully in his hands. It was his first taste of real coffee in years, and the rich, bitter warmth was a small, profound luxury. Himeko had been true to her word, and her brew was as expertly crafted as her scientific theories. He watched the cosmos streak by the reinforced window, a river of impossible colors and distant, glittering suns. It was a sight he had witnessed countless times on his interdimensional sojourn, yet it never failed to instill a sense of quiet awe. Approaching the T-38 jump point, Himeko's voice announced over the train's internal comms. As crisp and clear as the chime that preceded it. Next stop, Jarilo. Estimated time of arrival is 15 minutes. I suggest everyone prepares for a significant temperature drop. And Naruto, try not to be too alarmed by the welcoming committee. They can be a bit formal. A faint smile touched Naruto's lips. Formality is just a shield, Himeko. I'm more interested in what it's protecting. He could almost hear her smile in her reply. A kindred spirit. See you in the main car in 5. He finished his coffee, the warmth spreading through him, and made his way to the front of the train. Welt, Dan Heng, and March 7th were already there, gathered around the holographic projection table. Himeko stood beside it, gesturing towards the image of a world-encased Almos. Tea entirely in a shell of brilliant white ice. This is Jarilo, she began, her tone shifting into its familiar, professional cadence. It's a unique case. The Stellaron here didn't burn the world, it froze it. An event the locals call the Eternal Freeze happened some 700 years ago. The last bastion of civilization is a city called Belobog, a marvel of pre-freeze engineering that has managed to survive against all odds. The hologram zoomed in, piercing the ice shell to reveal a city of towering spires and intricate metalwork, nestled in a massive crater. It was divided into two distinct levels. A pristine, brightly lit upper city, and a darker, more densely packed lower city. Belobog is divided into the overworld and the underworld, Welt explained, picking up the briefing. He looked at Naruto, his expression serious. The society is highly stratified. The overworld is home to the leadership and the affluent, ruled by a figure known as the Supreme Guardian. The underworld, LD, is where the miners and laborers live. Conditions are harsh, resources are scarce. Naruto's gaze was fixed on the hologram, but his senses were already reaching out, extending beyond the hull of the express. Even from this distance, he could feel the planet's life force. It wasn't dying like Hypno's IV. It was trapped, suffocating under a blanket of ice, its natural energy sluggish and cold, like blood congealing in frozen veins. He could feel the collective life force of the city, a beacon of stubborn warmth in the cold, but it was fractured, dissonant. The vibrant, orderly energy of the overworld was a stark contrast to the chaotic, desperate, yet fiercely resilient energy of the underworld. It was a city at war with itself. The Stellaron is contained deep within the planet's crust. Its energy harnessed by the city's central heating system, the Geomero, Himeko continued. It's a delicate balance. We've made contact with the current leadership. The Supreme Guardian, Kokolia Rand, has granted us permission to dock and conduct our investigation. Her adopted daughter and heir, Bronya Rand, will be our official liaison. Just a heads up, Naruto, March chimed in, twirling a strand of her pink hair. The last time we were here, things got a little complicated. The government is pretty strict, and they're not exactly fans of outsiders poking around in their business. Especially in the underworld. Dan Heng added his own stoic warning. Their laws are absolute. The Silvermane guards enforce them without question. Do not draw unnecessary attention. Naruto nodded, absorbing the information. He understood the subtext. This was not just a mission of healing, it was a diplomatic minefield. He was an unknown variable, a power they couldn't quantify. His very presence would be a disruption. As the Astral Express began its final approach, the sensation of cold intensified. It wasn't just a physical chill, it was a psychic cold, the lingering sorrow of a world locked in an endless winter. The train didn't land on the surface but entered a massive, subterranean docking bay carved from the rock and ice itself. The great doors hissed open, revealing a platform manned by a contingent of soldiers in immaculate silver and blue armor. They were the Silvermane guards, and their posture was as rigid and unyielding as the frozen world around them. At their head stood a young woman who carried herself with an air of authority that belied her years. She had long, silver-gray hair tied back in a sophisticated style, and her piercing violet eyes scanned the disembarking crew with a cool, analytical gaze. She was dressed in a pristine military uniform, adorned with the insignia of high command. This was, without a doubt, Bronya Rand. On behalf of the Supreme Guardian and the people of Belobog, I welcome you, trailblazers, she said, her voice clear and formal, each word precisely enunciated. It was a voice accustomed to giving orders and making proclamations. I am Bronya Rand. It is an honor to have the esteemed crew of the Astral Express grace our world once more. Her gaze swept over Himeko, Welt, and the others, acknowledging them with a slight nod, before finally settling on Naruto. Her eyes lingered on him for a fraction of a second longer than the others. There was no warmth in her gaze, only a deep, calculating curiosity. She had been briefed, of course. She knew an unknown entity was with them, one reportedly capable of impossible feats. He did not fit the profile of a hardened warrior or a mystical mage. He seemed calm, confident, yes, but in a quiet, unassuming way that she found difficult to parse. And you must be Naruto Uzumaki, she stated, not a hint of a question in her tone. Your unique abilities have been noted. Belobog is grateful for any assistance you may offer in our ongoing struggle. The words were polite, but the underlying message was clear. We know you are powerful. We are watching you. Naruto offered a slight bow of his head, a gesture of respect that was neither subservient nor arrogant. Bronya-san, it is a pleasure to meet you. Your city is impressive, a testament to the strength of the human spirit. His simple, direct address seemed to momentarily surprise her. She was used to titles and honorifics, the careful language of diplomacy. His use of her name, paired with a simple suffix of respect, was both disarmingly familiar and entirely appropriate. It subtly shifted the power dynamic of the conversation, placing them on a more even footing. "Thank you, Mr. Uzumaki," she recovered smoothly. "The Supreme Guardian has prepared accommodations for you in the administrative district. I will escort you personally. Your vessel will be secure here under the protection of the Silvermane guards." As she turned to lead them, Himeko gave Naruto a subtle, knowing look. The formality was even thicker than she'd remembered. The city of Belobog was breathtaking. The administrative district was a masterpiece of architecture and engineering. A city of clean lines, polished stone, and glowing geothermal conduits that pulsed with a soft, warm light. The air was crisp, clean, and carried the faint scent of ozone. Citizens in fine, warm clothing walked the wide boulevards with a sense of purpose and order. It was a city that projected an image of strength, stability, and prosperity. Yet, Naruto could feel the truth beneath the pristine facade. His sage mode allowed him to perceive the emotional state of those around him, the collective consciousness of the city. Beneath the calm and order, there was a current of anxiety. A fear of the cold, a fear of the fragmentum monsters that roamed the frozen wastes outside the city, a fear of the precarious balance that maintained their survival. The city wasn't thriving, it was holding its breath. They were led to a large, ornate government building, where Bronya conducted a formal tour. She spoke of the city's history, of the wisdom of the Supreme Guardians, of the tireless work of the architects who maintained the city's systems. Her words were a well-rehearsed speech, a carefully constructed narrative of strength and control. Naruto listened patiently, his hands clasped behind his back as he walked. He observed everything, from the intricate patterns on the tapestries to the faint stress lines around the eyes of the guards they passed. He was a master of discerning the truth beneath the truth, a skill honed by years of dealing with spies, traitors, and politicians in his own world. "Your heating system, the Geomero," Naruto said, his voice cutting through Bronya's monologue. "You said it harnesses the power of the Stellaron. Is it a stable system?" Bronya paused, turning to face him. Her expression was unreadable. "It is the source of our city's life, Mr. Uzumaki. It has sustained us for 700 years. The architects are the finest engineers in the known world. It is perfectly stable." "And the underworld?" Naruto pressed, his gaze steady. "Does the system provide for them as efficiently as it does here in the overworld?" A flicker of something, annoyance, defensiveness, crossed Bronya's face before being immediately suppressed. The distribution of heat is a complex logistical challenge. The Supreme Guardian ensures that resources are allocated for the greatest good of all of Belobog's citizens. The people of The Underworld contribute to our society through their vital work in the mines, and they are provided for accordingly. It was a politician's answer. A carefully worded deflection. Naruto did not push further. But the non-answer told him everything he needed to know. It was then that he felt it. A sharp, sudden spike of desperation from deep below. It was not a single voice, but a chorus of them, a wave of fear, pain, and cold. It was a raw, unfiltered plea for help that cut through the sterile calm of the overworld like a scream in a library. It originated from the underworld, from the very here. Of the community he had heard so much about. He stopped walking. The rest of the group, noticing his sudden stillness, paused as well. "Naruto?" Himeko asked, a note of concern in her voice. "What is it?" Naruto's eyes were distant, his head tilted as if listening to something no one else could hear. "Something is wrong," he said, his voice low and serious. "Down below, there's a great deal of suffering." Bronya's posture stiffened. "The underworld has its challenges, Mr. Uzumaki, but I assure you the situation is under control. The Silvermane guards maintain order." "This isn't about order, Bronya-san," Naruto said, his gaze locking onto hers. The casual respect was gone, replaced by an intensity that made her instinctively take a half step back. "This is about life. People are in pain. The cold, it's getting worse for them." Quote, "That is an internal matter for the Belobog government," Bronya stated, her tone turning icy. "Your mandate is to investigate the Stellaron, a task that can be accomplished from here. With our full cooperation." "My mandate," Naruto replied, his voice calm but unyielding, is to help people. And the people who need help right now are in the underworld. I'm going down there. I cannot permit that, Bronya said flatly. Unsanctioned travel to the underworld is strictly forbidden. It is a matter of security. Then I will go without your permission, Naruto said, his decision made. He was not asking. He was informing her. His unshakable confidence was not born of arrogance, but of absolute conviction. He had not fought gods and reshaped the destiny of his own world only to be stopped by bureaucratic red tape while people suffered. A tense silence fell over the group. The Silvermane guards shifted, their hands moving closer to their weapons. Dan. Heng's hand rested on the hilt of his spear. March looked nervously between Naruto and Bronya. It was Welt who stepped forward, ever the diplomat. Bronya, perhaps a compromise. Allow us to accompany Naruto. We will take full responsibility for his actions. Consider it part of our investigation. To fully understand the Stellaron's effect on this world, we must see its impact on all levels of your society. It would be a holistic approach. Bronya hesitated, caught between her duty to follow Kokolia's strict orders and the undeniable force of will emanating from the blonde man before her. He was not a supplicant asking for a favor. He was a force of nature that had just declared its path. To stand in his way seemed unwise. Welt's offer gave her a political out, a way to concede without losing face. After a long, tense moment, she gave a stiff, reluctant nod. Very well, but I will accompany you. And you will adhere to my authority at all times. Any deviation, and this arrangement is terminated. Fair enough, Naruto said, his intense demeanor softening slightly. He had gotten what he wanted. The journey down to the underworld was a stark, jarring transition. They rode a massive, clanking industrial elevator, its gears grinding in protest as it descended into the depths of the planet. The polished stone and warm light of the overworld gave way to rough-hewn rock, dripping pipes, and dim, flickering electric lamps. The air grew thick with the smell of rust, geothermal steam, and the sweat of hard labor. When the elevator doors opened, they were greeted by the sight of Boulder Town. It was a city built in the shadow of the overworld, a cramped, chaotic, yet strangely vibrant place. Rickety metal platforms and walkways crisscrossed a massive cavern, connecting buildings. T seemed to be carved directly into the rock. The sounds of industry were everywhere, the distant clang of pickaxes, the hiss of steam vents, the shouts of miners. The people here were pale and wore patched, worn clothing. They moved with a hurried, weary energy, but their eyes held a spark of fierce, stubborn resilience. They looked at Bronya and her pristine uniform with a mixture of fear, resentment, and practiced indifference. As they walked through the main square, a commotion erupted nearby. A group of miners were arguing with a Silvermane guard over a ration of heating fuel. The argument escalated, voices rising in anger and desperation. Suddenly, a figure burst through the crowd with startling speed and agility. It was a young woman, a whirlwind of motion and fierce energy. She had short, dark violet hair and eyes that burned with a rebellious fire. She moved with the coiled grace of a predator, a large, intimidating scythe-like weapon held expertly in her hands. She wore practical, dark clothing that allowed for maximum freedom of movement, and her expression was one of pure, undiluted defiance. That's enough, she snarled, placing herself between the miners and the guard. Her voice was sharp and clear, cutting through the noise of the argument. Can't you see these people are freezing? They need that fuel more than your overworld depots. The guard, flustered by her sudden appearance, stammered, "Seal. This is official business. Stand down." "Make me," she retorted, her grip tightening on her weapon. The crowd of miners behind her murmured in support. This woman, Seal, was clearly their champion, their protector. Bronya stepped forward, her expression one of cold disapproval. "Seal, you are interfering with a Silvermane guard in the execution of his duties. This is a punishable offense." Seal's fiery gaze snapped to Bronya, and a cynical, humorless smile touched her lips. Well, look what the elevator dragged down. The overworld's pristine princess, come to grace us with her presence. Are you lost, or just here to remind us how much better you have it up there? The venom in her voice was palpable. The history of bad blood between these two was immediately, painfully obvious. Before Bronya could deliver a retort, Seal's eyes fell on Naruto, Himeko, and the others. Her gaze was instantly suspicious, hostile. "And you brought guests," she sneered. "More pampered overworlders to stare at us like we're exhibits in a zoo." Naruto met her aggressive stare with his own calm, unwavering gaze. He didn't see a thug or a troublemaker. He saw a young woman shouldering the immense burden of protecting her people, using anger as a shield to hide her fear and desperation. She was so much like the person he used to be, fierce, loyal, and ready to fight the world for the sake of her precious people. "We're not from the overworld," Naruto said, his voice steady and calm, a stark contrast to the heated emotions of the scene. "My name is Naruto. We came to help." Seal let out a short, harsh laugh. "Help? People from the sky only ever come down to take. What do you want? Our Geomero, our manpower. We have nothing left to give." Before the confrontation could escalate further, a new voice, calm and gentle, interjected. "Seal, that's enough. They are not our enemies." A woman in a doctor's coat, with kind eyes and a serene demeanor, emerged from a nearby building marked with a red cross. She was Natasha, the underworld's doctor, and she commanded a quiet respect that even Seal seemed to heed. "Natasha," Seal said, her tone softening slightly, though she did not lower her weapon. "You don't know that. They're with her." She jerked her head towards Bronya. "They are guests of the Astral Express," Natasha said, her gaze moving to Himeko, whom she seemed to recognize. "And right now, I have more pressing concerns. The heating is failing in the western sector. The last Geomero vein is sputtering out. The children in the orphanage are getting sick from the cold." She looked directly at Bronya, her gentle voice carrying a heavy weight of accusation. "A problem I have reported to the overworld for weeks, with no response." Bronya had the grace to look uncomfortable. "The reports are being processed. The architects are assessing the situation. People are freezing now." Bronya, Seal spat. "They can't wait for your assessments." The desperate energy Naruto had sensed, the plea for help, it was all clicking into place. This was the source, the failing lifeblood of the community. "Take me there," Naruto said, his voice quiet but filled with an undeniable authority. All eyes turned to him. "Take me to this failing vein," he repeated, looking at Natasha. "I can help." Natasha looked at him, her experienced eyes assessing him. She saw no arrogance, no deceit, only a calm certainty. Seal, however, was still suspicious. "Help? What are you going to do? Talk it back to life?" She scoffed. "Something like that," Naruto replied simply. Hesitantly, moved by the quiet conviction in his voice and the desperation of her situation, Natasha nodded. "Very well. It is this way. But be warned, the fragmentum corruption is strong there." They followed Natasha through the winding, crowded streets of Boulder Town to its western edge. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the air grew heavy with a palpable sense of decay. They arrived at a large, cavernous chamber where a massive, crystalline vein of Geomero was embedded in the rock wall. It should have been glowing with a vibrant, orange warmth. Instead, it pulsed with a faint, sickly violet light, and large sections of it were dark and cold, covered in the same crystalline corruption Naruto had seen on Hypno's IV. "The fragmentum. This is it," Natasha said, her voice heavy with despair. "It's been getting weaker for months. Now, it's almost dead. We have no other source of heat for this sector." The miners who worked there stood by helplessly, their faces etched with worry. Children in a nearby shelter huddled together for warmth, their breath misting in the frigid air. Bronya stared at the dying vein, her face pale. The reality of the underworld's plight, the failure of her government's systems, was laid bare before her. This was not a statistic on a report, it was a dying lifeline. Seal stood with her arms crossed, her fierce expression tinged with a deep sadness. This was her home, her people, and she was powerless to stop their slow descent into the cold. Naruto walked forward, ignoring the cold, ignoring the whispers and stares of the onlookers. He placed a bare hand on the cold, corrupted surface of the Geomero. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he was still. He was not just touching a rock, he was connecting with the very essence of the planet. Or what little of it could be felt in this suffocating cavern. He could feel the Stellaron's poison, the fragmentum's cold, parasitic infection, choking the life out of the mineral. But beneath it, he could also feel a flicker of the Geomero's original purpose, its inherent warmth, its connection to the planet's core. "What's he doing?" a miner whispered. "Hush," Natasha murmured, her eyes wide with a sliver of hope. Then, it began. A soft, golden light emanated from Naruto's hand. It was not the harsh, electric light of the lamps, but a warm, organic glow, like the first rays of a sunrise. The light spread from his palm into the geomarrow, flowing through its crystalline structure like liquid gold. It was his life force, his sage energy, pure and potent, anathema to the cold corruption of the fragmentum. The sickly violet glow receded from the golden light, not violently, but as if it were a shadow being chased away by the dawn. The dark, dead sections of the vein began to glow, first faintly, then with increasing intensity. A deep, resonant hum filled the chamber, the sound of the geomarrow reawakening. A wave of gentle, soothing warmth began to radiate from the vein, pushing back the biting cold. The miners gasped. The children in the shelter peeked out, their eyes wide with wonder as the warmth touched their faces. Seal's jaw was slack, her cynical smirk completely gone, replaced by an expression of utter disbelief. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her scythe. She was witnessing an impossibility, a miracle performed by the strange, calm M. And she had been so ready to fight just minutes ago. The warmth washing over her was real, undeniable. It was the warmth of hope, something she hadn't truly felt in years. Bronya stood frozen, her mind, so used to logic and political calculation, unable to process what she was seeing. This man was not just a powerful warrior. He was a healer, a restorer. The power he wielded was not destructive, but creative. It was a power that could solve problems she had been taught were insurmountable, a power that existed completely outside her carefully ordered world. He was not just an asset, he was a revolution in human form. The implications for Belobog, for her own future, were staggering. Naruto did not move for several long minutes, his body a conduit for the golden energy pouring into the heart of the mountain. Finally, as the entire vein of geomarrow glowed with a healthy, vibrant orange light, bathing the entire chamber in its warmth, he withdrew his hand. The golden aura around him receded, and he took a slow, deep breath. A faint sheen of sweat covered his brow, but his expression was serene. He turned to face the stunned crowd. The miners were staring at him with awe and reverence. Natasha had tears in her eyes. Seal was looking at him with a complex mixture of suspicion, gratitude, and a dawning, grudging respect. And Bronya was looking at him as if she was seeing the world for the first time. "It will hold," Naruto said, his voice quiet but carrying through the now warm chamber. "I have purged the corruption and rekindled its connection to the planet's core. It is not a permanent solution. The source of the corruption, the Stellaron, is still present deep within the world. But for now, you will have warmth." No one spoke. The only sound was the steady, healthy hum of the revitalized geomarrow. Then, one of the miners, an old man with a face like a roadmap of a hard life, took a step forward and bowed deeply to Naruto. Then another, and another. Soon, all the people of the underworld present were bowing, a silent, profound gesture of gratitude that transcended words. Seal did not bow, but her hostile stance had vanished. She stood straight, her weapon held loosely at her side, her fiery eyes fixed on Naruto, trying to understand the man who had just done the impossible. He had not asked for payment. He had not made demands. He had simply seen a need, and he had met it. Naruto looked at the bowing people and gave a small, gentle shake of his head. "Please, there is no need for that. A world is only as strong as its people. And from what I have seen, the people of Belobog are very strong indeed." He had come to this frozen world expecting to find a simple, contained problem. Instead, he had walked into a complex web of social strife, political intrigue, and hidden desperation. And in doing so, he had revealed a power that would make him the focal point of this fractured city's hopes and fears. He had earned the admiration of the downtrodden, the wary respect of their fierce protector, and the intense, calculating interest of their future leader. The echoes of this frozen world were just beginning to resound, and he was now standing at their very center. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Guardian's Gambit. The ascent from the underworld was a journey through worlds, not just meters. The grinding clatter of the industrial elevator, sound that had been a menacing backdrop on the way down, now seemed a contemplative rhythm against the profound silence that had fallen over the occupants. They left behind the echoing gratitude of the miners, the tangible warmth of the revitalized Geomero, and the raw, chaotic vitality of Boulder Town, rising back towards the cold, sterile order of the overworld. The air itself seemed to thin, changing from the thick, humid atmosphere of the caverns to the crisp, filtered air of the city above, and with the change came a shift in the emotional climate. The brief, miraculous unity they had nest below began to fracture as they approached the surface, the harsh realities of Belobog's stratified society reasserting their dominion. Bronya stood ramrod straight, her gloved hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. She stared at the elevator's metal wall, but her gaze was turned inward, replaying the scene at the Geomero vein on an endless loop. The golden light, the impossible warmth, the faces of the underworlders, transformed from desperation to awe. Her entire life had been built upon a foundation of logic, order, and the established principles of science and governance as taught by her mother, Cocolia. That foundation now had a gaping, Naruto-shaped hole in it. The power he wielded was not in any textbook, not in any historical record of the architects. It was primal, miraculous, and utterly outside the system she represented. It was a variable she could not control, and in her world, uncontrolled variables were the most dangerous things of all. Seal leaned against the opposite wall, her massive scythe resting easily on her shoulder. Her fiery antagonism had cooled to a simmering, watchful intensity. She hadn't said a word since Naruto had turned from the bowing crowd. Her eyes, however, kept flicking towards him, a complex storm of doubt, grudging admiration, and profound curiosity raging within them. He had done more for her people in 10 minutes than the overworld had done in a decade. This fact was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was also a seed of something she hadn't dared to nurture for a long time, a sliver of hope that wasn't born from her own defiance. Naruto himself was perfectly serene. He stood near the center of the elevator car, his hands tucked into the pockets of his trousers, his expression calm and thoughtful. He felt the turbulent emotions swirling around him. Bronya's intellectual crisis, Seal's guarded turmoil, Himeko's analytical concern, and Matcha's bubbling, barely contained excitement. He was the stone dropped into the still, frozen pond of Gerolo V. And these were the first of the ripples. He knew this moment, this quiet ascent, was the calm before a very different kind of storm. The elevator shuddered to a halt, its doors hissing open to reveal the familiar, pristine platform of the administrative district. The contrast was jarring. The Silvermane guards snapped to attention, their polished armor gleaming under the bright, artificial lights. The air was silent, orderly, sterile. It felt like a world away from the vibrant chaos of Boulder Town. Seal was the first to move. She pushed herself off the wall and strode towards the exit, pausing only when she was level with Naruto. "Don't think this changes anything," she said, her voice low and sharp, meant for his ears alone. "One warm rock doesn't fix 100 years of neglect." Her gaze was piercing. She jerked her chin almost imperceptibly towards Bronya, "will try to use you. They'll smile and make promises, wrap you up in their laws and their politics until you forget who you are. Don't trust them. Don't trust their sweet words. The underworld will be watching." Without waiting for a reply, she stalked out of the elevator bay, into a service corridor and disappearing from sight, a ghost of defiance returning to her shadowed home. Naruto watched her go, a faint, understanding smile on his face. She was right to be wary. Trust, in a world like this, was a currency more precious than any mineral. "My apologies for her abrasive nature," Bronya said, her voice regaining its formal, controlled timbre. She had reassembled her composure, the mask of the air apparent firmly back in place. "The people of the underworld are passionate. They lack the broader perspective we have in the overworld. They have the perspective of the ground, Bronya-san." Naruto countered gently, turning to face her. "Sometimes, that's the clearest view of all." Bronya's lips thinned, but she did not argue the point. "The Supreme Guardian will want a full report. Himeko-san, Welt-san, if you and your crew would please return to your assigned quarters, I will escort Mr. Uzumaki to the palace. Cocolia will wish to speak with him directly." Himeko and Welt exchanged a look. "We go where Naruto goes," Himeko stated, her tone pleasant but non-negotiable. This is a matter of state, Himeko-san, Bronya insisted, her authority being challenged for the second time that day. And Naruto is a member of my crew, Himeko countered, her smile never faltering. A holistic investigation, remember. We wouldn't want to miss a single data point. Bronya's jaw tightened. She was being outmaneuvered, and she knew it. But to cause a scene here, in front of the guards, would be a sign of weakness. She gave a short, sharp nod. As you wish. Follow me. Clippeth Fort was not merely a palace, it was a fortress of ideology. It was the heart of the overworld, a towering structure of white stone and polished metal that scraped the roof of the massive cavern Belobog called home. The interior was a masterpiece of cold, imposing beauty. Vast halls with impossibly high ceilings, floors of polished marble that reflected the cool, blue light from the glowing conduits. And grand tapestries depicting the history of the Supreme Guardians, always portrayed as benevolent, wise, and all-powerful. The air was still and cool, the silence broken only by the synchronized footsteps of their escort. It was a place designed to make one feel small, insignificant, a mere cog in the grand, perfect machine of the state. They were led to a pair of massive, ornate doors at the end of a long, imposing hall. The two Silvermane guards standing sentinel there struck their halberds against the floor in unison, a booming sound that echoed through the silence, and pushed the great doors open. The Supreme Guardian's office was even more intimidating than the hall that led to it. The entire far wall was a single, colossal window of reinforced crystal, offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire overworld. The city spread out below like a perfect, glittering model, a testament to the order Cocolia commanded. The room was sparsely furnished, domin, aided by a massive desk carved from a single piece of black, obsidian-like stone. And behind that desk, a figure sat, cloaked in shadow, the light from the city silhouetting her form. As they entered, the figure rose. Cocolia Rand was a woman of striking, severe beauty. She possessed the same silver hair as Bronya, but hers was worn in a complex, regal style. Her eyes, a shade of violet so deep they were almost black, were cold and sharp, possessing an unnerving stillness that seemed to suck the warmth from the room. She wore the formal, ornate attire of the Supreme Guardian, a uniform that was both a symbol of her power and a suit of emotional armor. Her presence was absolute, an aura of unshakable authority honed by years of absolute rule. Bronya, Cocolia's voice was like the crack of ice, devoid of maternal warmth. It was the voice of a commander addressing a subordinate. You were given simple instructions. To escort our guests, to assess the new arrival. Instead, you instigated an unauthorized excursion to the underworld and created a public spectacle. Mother, Bronya began, her formal tone faltering for a fraction of a second. There were extenuating circumstances. The heating in the western sector was failing. People were in danger. The dangers of the underworld are a constant, managed state of affairs, Cocolia countered, her cold gaze sweeping over Himeko and Welt before landing with palpable weight on Naruto. And you, Naruto Uzumaki. She glided around her desk, her movements fluid and predatory. She circled him like a shark assessing a strange new creature in its territory. Naruto stood perfectly still, his hands relaxed at his sides, his calm expression a stark contrast to the room's oppressive atmosphere. He met her icy gaze without flinching. I have read Bronya's preliminary report, Cocolia said, her voice dripping with skepticism. It speaks of miracles, of a dying geomero vein, rekindled by touch. Such things are the stuff of fairy tales, written to placate children. Tell me, Mr. Uzumaki, what is the true nature of your trickery? Some advanced form of trailblaze technology. A psychokinetic manipulation of geothermal energy. It was no trick, Supreme Guardian. Naruto replied, his voice even and respectful, yet carrying a weight that matched her own. I connected with the life force of your world and shared some of my own to help it mend itself. The geomero is not just a rock, it is a part of your planet. And your planet is still alive, just wounded. Cocolia stopped in front of him, her eyes narrowing. Life force, sharing, has caused a significant disruption. You have given the people of the underworld false hope. Hope is a dangerous, volatile commodity. It leads to unrest, to demands, to chaos. For 700 years, Belobog has survived not on hope, but on order. On control. A delicate balance that you have threatened with your display. Is it balance? Naruto questioned, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate. More challenging, or is it suppression? I saw a great deal of suffering, Kokolia-sama. Suffering that did not seem necessary for the survival of the overworld. The use of her name. The directness of his challenge, hung in the air like a charged particle. Kokolia's cold composure finally cracked, a flash of pure fury in her eyes before it was ruthlessly suppressed. You are an outsider. You do not understand our ways, she hissed. You are a powerful, unknown element, and I will not allow you to destabilize my city. Your investigation of the Stellaron will be confined to the data we provide you. You and your crew will remain in your assigned quarters under guard. Any further unauthorized actions will be met with the full force of Belobog's authority. Is that understood? It was a declaration of war, wrapped in the language of diplomacy. Naruto was now a prisoner. Back in their lavishly appointed but heavily guarded quarters, the mood was somber. 2 silver. Main guards stood sentinel outside their door, a constant reminder of their new status. Well, that went about as well as expected, Himeko sighed, pouring herself a cup of tea. Her usual scientific enthusiasm was tempered by a clear concern. Kokolia sees you as a threat to her power, Naruto. Plain and simple, she's not interested in healing the planet, she's interested in maintaining her control over it. Welt, who had been silent throughout the entire encounter, finally spoke. She is afraid, he said, his gaze thoughtful. But her fear has made her dangerous. She rules through the careful management of despair. By giving the underworld hope, you've taken away one of her primary tools of control. She will not forgive that. Naruto stood by the window, looking down at the perfectly ordered city below. She is a leader who has forgotten who she is leading. She sees her people as pieces on a board, not as a family to be protected. I've seen leaders like her before. Their paths always lead to ruin. So what do we do? March asked, flopping onto a plush sofa. Are we just supposed to sit here? What about the Stellaron? Kokolia is the obstacle now, not the Stellaron, Naruto said, turning from the window. We cannot help this world if its leader stands in our way. We need to change her perspective, or change the leadership. The statement was bold, radical. But to Naruto, it was a simple, logical conclusion. He had never been one to bow to corrupt authority. It was later that evening that a soft knock came at their door. Welt opened it to find Bronya, alone, without her honor guard. She was dressed in a simpler, less formal attire, and her hair was down, softening her severe features. She looked less like an heir and more like a troubled young woman. May I have a word with Naruto-san? She asked, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. Alone. Himeko and Welt exchanged another look, but Naruto gave a slight nod. It's all right. Let her in. Bronya entered, and the door closed behind her, leaving them in a bubble of privacy. She did not speak immediately, instead walking over to the large window, her posture betraying a deep internal conflict. What you did today, she began, her back still to him. I have run the energy calculations 100 times. It's impossible. It violates the fundamental laws of conservation of energy. And yet, I saw it. I felt the warmth. Some things can't be measured in joules or kilowatts, Bronya-san, Naruto said softly. She turned to face him, her violet eyes filled with a mixture of awe and desperation. My mother, she does not see it that way. She sees you as a threat, a messiah for the downtrodden, a catalyst for rebellion. And what do you see? Naruto asked, his gaze steady and searching. Bronya took a breath, steeling herself. This was her gambit. I see potential, an opportunity. What you possess, it could be the salvation of Belobog. Not just the underworld, but all of it. Our infrastructure is failing. The Geomero is becoming less efficient. The Fragmentum is a constant, encroaching threat. My mother's methods are rigid. They have kept us alive, but we are not living. We are simply surviving. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Help me, Naruto-san. Work with me, not against her, not yet. But with me. Lend me your strength, your wisdom. We can show her a new way. We can reform the system from within. We can create a unified Belobog, where the underworld is not neglected, where the overworld is not living in constant fear. A city that is truly strong, truly alive. It must be done slowly, carefully. Through political means. A gradual shift, not a violent revolution. It was a tempting offer, a logical path. A partnership with the heir to the throne. But Naruto could see the flaw in her plan. The naivete born of a life lived in a gilded cage. He smiled, a sad, wise smile. You are a good person, Bronya rant. You truly want what is best for your people. But your plan is destined to fail. Bronya recoiled as if struck. What? Why? Because you cannot reform a system while leaving its sick heart in place, Naruto explained, his voice gentle but firm. Your mother will never allow a gradual shift. She will see any change as a threat to her authority. You speak of political means, but her power is absolute. There is no political path that does not end with her approval. And she will never approve of this. He took a step closer, his presence commanding but not threatening. You want to show her a new way. But have you ever considered that she has already chosen her way? And will not be moved from it. You want to heal the city from the top down. But the foundation is rotten. You must start there, with the people. That is anarchy, Bronya protested. The words of her mother's teachings echoing in her voice. It would lead to chaos, to civil war. No, Naruto corrected her. That is unity. When a leader derives their strength from the will of their people. That is the strongest government of all. I once knew a world that was trapped in a cycle of hatred, a cycle far older and deeper than your city's division. It was broken not by a king's decree, but by the shared understanding and will of the people. Just then, a faint, rhythmic sound from outside the window caught their attention. It was a chanting, low and distant, but growing. They moved to the window and looked down. A crowd was gathering in the main plaza below, a crowd comprised of underworlders who had somehow made their way to the surface, joined by a few sympathetic overworld citizens. They were holding makeshift signs, their faces illuminated by the cold city lights. At their head, standing on a public fountain, was the unmistakable, defiant figure of Seal. They weren't rioting. They were holding a vigil. A peaceful protest, demanding fair treatment, demanding the kind of hope that Naruto's actions had given them. Bronya stared, her face pale. This was exactly what her mother had feared. Chaos. Unrest. This is what I mean, Bronya, Naruto said softly, his voice right beside her ear. This is not anarchy. This is the city's true voice, finally speaking up. Seal is not your enemy. The people are not your enemy. Your mother's fear is your enemy. The system that tells you one life is worth more than another is your enemy. Bronya looked from the crowd below, to the man standing beside her. He wasn't just powerful, he was wise. He saw the world with a clarity she had never known. He had dissected her carefully constructed plan, her great political gambit, with a few simple, devastating truths. He hadn't rejected her, he had shown her that she was aiming at the wrong target. Her admiration for him, born from the awe of his power, was now transforming into something deeper. It was a respect for his mind, for his unwavering moral clarity. He made her want to be better. He made her want to be a leader worthy of the title. What should I do? She whispered, the question a quiet surrender of her own certainty. Naruto looked at her, then back at the crowd below. Don't see them as a problem to be managed. See them as your people, to be understood. Go down there, not as the heir, not as a commander, but as a citizen of Belobog. Listen to them. That is the first step. Bronya stared at him, her heart pounding. His suggestion was terrifying. It went against every protocol, every fiber of her training. It was political suicide, but in her heart, she knew he was right. Her gambit to win him over had failed. But in its place, a new, far more dangerous and far more hopeful path was beginning to form. Her allegiance was shifting, not to him, but to the ideals he represented. And that made her a far greater threat to Kokolia than Naruto could ever be on his own. She looked at the determined set of his jaw, the ancient wisdom in his sapphire eyes, and she made her decision. Her gambit hadn't failed, it had simply evolved. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. A Hunter's Waltz. The silence that followed Bronya's departure was heavier than the one that had preceded it. She had left not with a promise or a plan, but with a quiet, terrifying resolve in her eyes. Naruto watched from the window as she descended, a lone, silver-haired figure walking purposefully towards the growing crowd in the plaza. She did not command them to disperse, she did not address them with the authority of her station. She simply went, as he had suggested, to listen. It was a single, revolutionary act, and in the cold, ordered world of Belobog, it was as loud as a cannon blast. The ripples were already spreading. She's either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the most foolish, Himeko murmured, coming to stand beside him. The view from their gilded cage of fared a perfect vantage point of the unfolding drama. They're often the same thing, Naruto replied, his gaze fixed on the scene below. It's the first choice that matters. The one that sets the path. Welt, ever the strategist, was already thinking several steps ahead. Cocolia will see this as an act of betrayal. Bronya has publicly aligned herself with the protesters. She's given their cause legitimacy. The Supreme Guardian will move to contain this, and us, with even greater force. As if on cue, the number of Silvermane guards outside their suite doubled. The soft hum of an energy field, sealing the corridor beyond their door confirmed Welt's prediction. They were no longer guests under house arrest, they were prisoners of the state. March 7th, who had been anxiously watching the unfolding events, threw herself back onto the sofa with a groan. Great, so now we're trapped. What's the plan? Bust our way out, because I can totally freeze that door. Probably. Patience, March, Welt counseled. Though his expression was grim. A direct confrontation would only escalate the situation and endanger Bronya further. Naruto, however, had grown unnaturally still. His head tilted slightly, his sapphire eyes losing their focus on the city below. He was listening to something else, something far subtler than the distant chants of the crowd or the hum of the energy field. It had started a few moments ago. A faint static in the symphony of life he constantly perceived. It wasn't the chaotic, desperate energy of the underworld, nor the anxious, suppressed energy of the overworld. This was different. It was a slick, deliberate, and predatory energy signature. It felt like a spider spinning a single, invisible thread in the corner of a room. It was patient, watchful, and focused entirely, and unmistakably, on him. Someone else is here, Naruto said, his voice a low murmur. Someone new. They weren't in Belobog an hour ago. Himeko turned to him, her scientific curiosity instantly engaged. A new energy signature. What are its properties? It's elusive, Naruto said, closing his eyes to better focus his senses. It feels like it's deliberately masking itself, bending the flow of energy around it to avoid detection. It's highly controlled, sophisticated. He opened his eyes, a glint of steel within their blue depths. And it's watching me. Dan Heng, who had been silently observing from a corner, pushed himself off the wall. A scout, one of Cocolia's hidden assets. No, Naruto shook his head. This doesn't feel like it's part of this world. It feels like an interloper. Like me. He turned away from the window, his decision made. I'm going to go say hello. How? March asked, sitting up and pointing at the sealed door. They've got us locked down tight. A slow, confident smile spread across Naruto's face, a look that hinted at the mischievous youth he once was, now honed into the quiet competence of the master. A cage is only a cage if you accept its walls. He walked to the center of the room, far from the door and the window. He brought his hands together in a single, simple hand seal, the ram seal, a gesture so ingrained it was like breathing. He closed his eyes, and for a fraction of a second, the natural energy in the room seemed to coalesce around him. Then, with a soft, barely audible poof, his body dissolved into a puff of smoke, leaving behind only the faint scent of ozone and the bewildered faces of his companions. A moment later, a second, identical poof echoed from the grand hallway outside, beyond the energy field and the legion of guards. Show off, March grumbled. But there was a wide, impressed grin on her face. Himeko simply shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips as she made a mental note to ask him about physics of instantaneous matter to energy to matter conversion later. Naruto reappeared in a shadowed alcove 2 floors below, the sounds of the guards' confused shouts a distant echo. Bypassing them had been trivial. He hadn't overpowered them, he had simply sidestepped their perception, a ghost in their machine. His senses, now free from the confines of the suite, reached out, following the thin, predatory thread of energy. It led him away from the bustling administrative centers and the residential spires, towards a quieter, more forgotten part of the overworld. The Belobog History Museum. The building was a grand, domed structure, but it was dark, closed for the night. The energy signature was inside, moving with a slow, deliberate grace through the silent halls. Naruto flowed through the shadows of the plaza, a phantom of motion that the patrolling Silvermane automatons failed to register. He didn't force the museum's massive, locked doors. Instead, he found a high window, leaping the 20-meter gap with silent ease, and slipped inside, landing as softly as a falling leaf on the polished marble floor. The air inside was still, cool, and thick with the scent of old paper, polished wood, and preservation chemicals. Moonlight, filtered through the icy haze of the cavern roof, streamed in through the high windows, illuminating the silent exhibits. Skeletons of strange, Freeze beasts stood like monolithic sculptures. Glass cases held artifacts from a world that no longer existed. Faded clothing, primitive tools, books with brittle, yellowed pages. It was a hall of ghosts. A fitting place to meet the new presence. He followed the sensation to the museum's central rotunda. It was a vast, circular room, the ceiling soaring high into a dome painted with a faded mural of a blue-skied world. In the center of the room, a woman stood with her back to him, seemingly engrossed in the exhibit before her, a detailed diorama of old Belobog, the city as it was before the eternal freeze. She was tall and slender, with a cascade of fuchsia hair that seemed to absorb the dim moonlight. She wore a stylish black coat over a form-fitting outfit, an ensemble that was both elegant and eminently practical. Even from behind, she exuded an aura of casual, almost languid confidence. This was his observer. He took a single, deliberate step forward, the soft click of his boot and the marble floor the only sound in the cavernous room. It was an announcement of his presence. The woman didn't turn. A low, amused chuckle, sultry and melodic, echoed in the silence. I was beginning to wonder how long you'd stay cooped up in that suite. I was starting to get bored. She spoke the galactic common tongue with a playful, musical lilt. They really shouldn't have used such a simple, energy-based lock. It's like putting up a neon sign for someone like you. She turned, slowly. Her face was beautiful, framed by her striking hair, with eyes that held a knowing, mischievous glint. A pair of sunglasses were pushed up into her hair. A soft, enigmatic smile played on her lips, a smile that was both inviting and incredibly dangerous. It was a smile that knew secrets you hadn't even thought to ask about. So, she said, her gaze sweeping over him, appraising and appreciative. You're the anomaly. The variable Elio couldn't quite pin down. The sage of the silent star. You're more handsome than the wanted posters will inevitably make you out to be. Naruto remained impassive, his own senses analyzing her. The energy she exuded was strange. It wasn't the raw power of a warrior, but something more subtle. More insidious. It was woven into her very words, her presence. You have me at a disadvantage, he said, his voice calm and even. You know my name, but I don't have the pleasure of knowing yours. Her smile widened. Pleasure and danger are often two sides of the same coin, wouldn't you agree? You may call me Kafka. As she spoke his name, Naruto felt a subtle pressure against his mind. It was not an attack, but a gentle, probing touch, like a phantom finger tracing the edges of his consciousness. It was her ability, the one the energy signature was wrapped around. A spirit whisper, as she called it, an attempt to read him, to influence him, to pluck the strings of his emotions and memories. He didn't fight it. He didn't need to. His mind, honed by decades of meditation and the perfect clarity of sage mode, was a tranquil sea. Her probe slid off his consciousness like water off a stone. There were no strings for her to pull. He simply observed the attempt with a detached curiosity. Kafka's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, her smile faltering almost imperceptibly. She had expected something. A flicker of resistance, a trace of a memory, a ripple of emotion. Instead, she found nothing. A perfect, serene calm. It was like trying to read the surface of a flawless mirror. It didn't resist. It simply reflected her own probe back at her, showing her nothing. This had never happened before. You're very quiet, she recovered, her voice a little less playful, a little more intrigued. Most people have so much noise in their heads. Regrets, desires, fears. It's a constant symphony. But you're silent. A quiet mind is a sign of a clear purpose, Naruto replied simply. Now, Kafka-san, why are you here? And why are you watching me? Straight to business. No time for a little flirtation. She pouted dramatically, taking a slow, deliberate step towards him, her hips swaying with a practiced grace. All right, I'm here because my master, Elio, wrote it in his script. He writes the future, you see. And you, Naruto Uzumaki, have just become the most interesting, unwritten chapter. A script, Naruto mused. So you're a puppet, dancing to someone else's tune. The words hit their mark. A flicker of something real, annoyance, perhaps, crossed her face. We are all puppets, Sage. Most of us just can't see the strings. Elio's script leads to a better future. A future where the cancer of all worlds, the Stellarons, are finally neutralized. I am an agent of that destiny. Destiny, Naruto said, a faint, knowing smile touching his lips. I knew a boy once who was told he was destined to be a failure, a monster. He was told he would bring ruin to his world. The script was written for him from the day he was born. He took a step towards her, closing the distance between them. His presence wasn't aggressive, but it was absolute, and for the first time, Kafka felt like she was the one being analyzed. He didn't like the script, Naruto continued, his voice low and compelling. So he picked up a pen and wrote his own story. Destiny isn't a road you walk. It's a mountain you climb. And you can choose any path you want to the top. Kafka was mesmerized. His words weren't laced with any special power, yet they held a profound weight, the weight of lived experience. He spoke of destiny not as a philosopher, but as someone who had wrestled with it and won. Her own unwavering faith in Elio's script felt, for the first time, like a cage. This man, with his calm eyes and unbreakable will, was the living embodiment of the freedom she secretly craved. Her fascination with him deepened, becoming a dangerous, thrilling cocktail of intellectual curiosity and physical attraction. A poet, she purred, recovering her composure. I like that, but words are cheap. Elio requires a more practical demonstration of your abilities. In a motion too fast for a normal eye to follow, her hand blurred. It wasn't a punch or a grab. She drew two sleek, custom machine pistols from holsters hidden within her coat. The metallic clicks as she cocked them were sharp and deadly in the silent museum. Let's dance, she whispered. She didn't wait for an answer. She opened fire, not with a wild spray, but with a series of precise, controlled bursts. The bullets weren't aimed to kill, but to pin him down, to test his reactions, to force him to move. Naruto didn't move. Time seemed to slow down for him. He saw the muzzle flashes, the spin of the projectiles as they cut through the air, their trajectories perfectly calculated. He could have dodged. He could have deflected them. He could have substituted with a block of wood and been gone before the first shell casing hit the floor. He chose a different path. He simply raised his hand, palm open. A thin, invisible layer of pure chakra, of his own life force, coated his skin. The first bullet struck his palm and stopped dead, its kinetic energy completely absorbed. It dropped to the floor with a soft, metallic clink. Then the second, the third. A small pile of deformed lead slugs began to form at his feet. He hadn't moved an inch. Kafka stopped firing. Her playful smile was gone, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. That was impossible. No shield, no armor she had ever encountered, could absorb kinetic energy so perfectly, without any recoil or energy discharge. My turn, Naruto said, his voice still perfectly calm. He vanished. There was no puff of smoke this time. He simply moved, his speed so immense that he seemed to tear a hole in reality itself. Before Kafka could even register that he was gone, he was behind her. She felt not a blow, but a gentle pressure on her wrists. She looked down to see his hands holding hers, his grip firm but not painful. Her prized pistols were gone from her grasp, now held loosely in his other hand. He had disarmed her without her even perceiving the motion. She felt the warmth of his body behind her, the soft sound of his breathing near her ear. A shiver, not of fear, but of pure, unadulterated thrill, ran down her spine. She was a hunter, a predator. But in this moment, she felt like prey, and it was the most exhilarating feeling she had ever known. Your skills are impressive, Naruto said, his voice a low rumble. Your movements are precise, your aim is perfect. But you rely too much on your tools and your tricks. Your heart isn't in the fight. You're just following a script. He released her wrists and stepped back, placing her pistols gently on the base of a nearby statue. He had won, completely and utterly. Without causing a single scratch, without even raising his voice. It was a demonstration of power so absolute it was more terrifying than any destructive attack. Kafka turned to face him, a slow, genuine smile returning to her face, different from the one she had worn before. This one held real admiration, real fascination. Well, she breathed, her voice a little shaky. That was educational. She straightened her coat, her composure returning, but her eyes never left his. You've passed, sage, with flying colors. Elio will be most pleased. I don't care about your Elio's approval, Naruto said, his gaze serious. I want answers. Why are you really here? What is your purpose in Belobog? Kafka's smile turned sly. Isn't it obvious? To add a little chaos to the order. To give the story a little push in the right direction. She began to walk backwards, melting into the shadows of the rotunda. As a reward for such a lovely dance, I'll give you a gift. A little unwritten line of dialogue. Her voice seemed to come from the shadows themselves now. Ask Cocolia about the Stellaron's will. Ask her what it whispers to her in the dead of night. The cage she's built for her city, it's also a cage for herself. And the key is buried deeper than any Geomaro. With a final, sultry chuckle, she was gone. The predatory energy signature that had been a constant pressure on Naruto's senses vanished completely. He was alone again in the silent museum, with only the pile of bullets at his feet and her cryptic words echoing in the air. He stood for a long moment in the quiet hall of ghosts. Her words replaying in his mind. The Stellaron's will. It wasn't just a power source. It was communicating, influencing its warden. Cocolia wasn't just a tyrant clinging to power. She was a victim, manipulated by the very thing she sought to control. The puzzle of Belobog had just become infinitely more complex. And he now knew that he and the Astral Express were not just players in a local conflict, but pieces on a galactic chessboard, being moved by a mysterious scriptwriter and a beautiful, dangerous hunter who danced to a tune only she could hear. With a sigh, he turned and walked towards the high window. The moonlight casting his long shadow on the marble floor. The night was far from over. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Will of the Winter. The scent of ozone and the faint, lingering memory of a phantom presence were all that remained of Kafka's visit. Naruto materialized back in the opulent suite with the same silent suddenness of his departure, the faint poof of displaced air a mere whisper in the tense room. He held her two pistols in one hand, their cold, metallic weight a stark contrast to the living warmth that radiated from his core. He placed them on the central table with a soft, definitive click, the sound drawing the immediate, anxious attention of his companions. She's gone, he announced, his voice calm, but with a new, underlying current of gravity. A Stellaron hunter. Calls herself Kafka. Welt's expression sharpened, his posture immediately shifting from concerned friend to seasoned veteran. Stellaron hunters. Here, that complicates matters immensely. They don't act without purpose, and their purposes rarely align with the preservation of life. She called herself an agent of destiny, Naruto elaborated, his gaze distant as he recalled the strange, exhilarating dance in the museum. Following a script written by someone named Elio. She seemed to think my presence here was an unwritten chapter. Elio, Dan Heng murmured from his corner. The single name spoken with a weight of grim recognition. The master of the Stellaron hunters. It is said he can perceive all possible futures, and he guides his followers along the path he deems most desirable. If you have drawn his attention, it is because you are now a pivotal piece in his cosmic game. Himeko, ever the pragmatist, leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the pistols on the table. What did she want? Did she attack you? It was a test, Naruto replied, his lips twitching into a faint, reminiscent smile. A dance. She was gauging my abilities. He met Himeko's worried gaze, his own reassuringly steady. She also left a gift. A piece of information. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. She told me to ask Cocolia about the Stellaron's will. She Suggested the Stellaron is communicating with her, influencing her. A heavy silence descended upon the room. The implications of that statement were staggering, recontextualizing everything they had witnessed. Cocolia wasn't just a tyrant clinging to power out of fear or greed. She was potentially a puppet, her strings pulled by the very cosmic cancer she was charged with containing. The eternal freeze wasn't just a historical event. It was an active, malevolent consciousness. That changes everything, Himeko breathed, her mind racing, connecting disparate data points. The irrational paranoia, the absolute refusal to consider alternative solutions, the increasing isolationism of Belobog. If her mind is being poisoned by the Stellaron, it would explain her behavior. It's not just flawed ideology. It's a symptom of a deeper infection. A queen corrupted by her own crown, Welt summarized grimly. It means our adversary is not Cocolia herself, but the entity whispering in her ear. A far more dangerous and insidious foe. So how do we fight a whisper? March asked, her usual cheerfulness completely gone, replaced by a troubled frown. Naruto walked back to the great window. Below, the scene in the plaza had evolved. Bronya was no longer standing at the edge of the crowd. She was in the thick of it, a small island of silver-haired calm in a sea of underworld gray. Seal stood near her, not as a guard, but as a wary bridge between the air and her people. They were talking, listening. A fragile, impossible dialogue was taking place under the cold, artificial lights of the overworld. We don't fight the whisper, Naruto said, his voice resonating with a newfound clarity. We fight the silence that allows it to be the only voice she hears. Kafka gave us the question. But we can't ask Cocolia directly. She would deny it, and we would be silenced permanently. He turned from the window, his sapphire eyes glowing with a faint, internal light. I need to go to the source. Not to the woman, but to the will that commands her. I need to listen to the planet. The plaza was a tinderbox of raw, exposed nerves. For the first time in generations, the people of the Our world had brought their grievances to the polished stone steps of the administrative district, and they had not been immediately beaten back or arrested. This simple fact, this momentary suspension of the brutal status quo, had created an atmosphere of terrifying, hopeful tension. They were a mass of pale faces, worn clothes, and calloused hands, their collective breath misting in the frigid air. They weren't shouting slogans or waving fists. Their protest was one of presence, a silent, damning testament to their suffering. Seal stood on the lip of a frozen fountain, her scythe held loosely. Its blade a crescent of dark metal against the bright sky of the cavern roof. She was a coiled spring of violent energy, her eyes scanning every shadow, every rooftop, for the inevitable crackdown from the Silvermane guards. Every instinct screamed at her to distrust the scene unfolding before her. At her side, Bronya Rand, the overworld princess, the symbol of their oppression, was speaking with an elderly miner named Oleg. The same man who had been the first to bow to Naruto in the depths. The filtration systems in the great mine have been failing for 3 cycles, Oleg was saying, his voice rough but steady. The dust sickness takes more of us every winter. We file the reports. They go up the lift. And nothing comes back down. Bronya listened, her face a mask of controlled neutrality. But her violet eyes betrayed the turmoil within. This wasn't a statistic on a data slate. This was a man's life, his community's slow death, described in plain, unvarnished words. I have reviewed the resource allocation reports, she said, her voice betraying a slight tremor of shame. The budget for underworld maintenance has been consistently rerouted to overworld beautification projects and military upgrades. Seal let out a short, bitter laugh. Beautification. Is that what you call the new opera house? We're coughing up our lungs so you can listen to music. It is not right, Bronya stated, her voice gaining a sliver of the conviction Naruto had instilled in her. She looked from Oleg to the faces in the crowd around him. It is an injustice, and I was blind to the true cost of it. Being blind is a privilege of the overworld, Seal shot back, though her words lacked their usual venom. She was watching Bronya closely. The princess wasn't making excuses. She wasn't defending her mother's policies. She was admitting fault. It was a small thing, a few simple words, but in the context of their world, it was a tectonic shift. Just then, a young girl, no older than 7, pushed her way through the crowd. She was one of the children from the orphanage, her face smudged with grime but her eyes wide with a defiant bravery. She clutched a single, wilted flower, a pale, hardy specimen that only grew in the deepest, warmest parts of the underworld. She walked right up to Branya and held it out. "This is for the warm man," the little girl said, her voice small but clear. "To say thank you." Branya knelt down, her pristine uniform brushing against the grimy plaza floor. She looked at the child, at the simple, heartfelt offering, and something in her carefully constructed facade finally broke. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. This was the hope Cocolia was so afraid of. This small, wilted flower held more power than all the Silvermane guards in the city. She took the flower with a gentle, trembling hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "I will make sure he gets it." Seal watched the exchange, her hand tightening on the haft of her scythe. This was dangerous. This display of vulnerability. This bridge of understanding being built before her very eyes, it was beautiful and terrifying. It made them a target. She looked up at the silent, imposing fortress of Clippeth Fort and felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with the temperature. The response was coming, and it would not be gentle. Naruto bypassed the guards again, a simple feat of misdirection and speed, and made his way to the one place in the overworld where he knew he could feel the planet's pulse most clearly. It wasn't a government building or a strategic location. It was a small, secluded park near the edge of the city. One of the few places where real soil, brought up from the depths long ago, was allowed to exist. A few hardy, genetically engineered trees, their leaves a pale, silvery green, grew under the soft glow of a full-spectrum sunlamp. He sat in the center of the small patch of grass, the ground cold even through his clothes. He closed his eyes, filtering out the hum of the city, the distant shouts, the thrum of the machinery that kept Belobog alive. He reached inward, to the core of his own being, to the vast, tranquil reservoir of sage energy he had cultivated over centuries. This was different from what he had done on Hypno's IV or in the underworld mine. There, he had been giving his energy, pushing it outward to heal a localized wound. Now, he needed to do the opposite. He needed to listen, to expand his senses, to merge his consciousness with the sluggish, frozen life force of Geralovi itself. It was an immensely delicate and dangerous operation. To see, connect so deeply with a world so profoundly wounded by a Stellaron was to risk having that wound infect his own soul. He took a slow, deep breath, and let go. His consciousness expanded. First, it filled the park, feeling the slow, patient life in the trees, the microbial colonies in the frozen soil. Then it spread, a wave of silent perception, across the overworld. He felt the collective anxiety of the Silvermane guards, the cold fury of Cocolia in her fortress, the fragile hope blossoming in the plaza. He felt Branya's resolve hardening, Seal's protective fear, Himeko's worried calculations, Welt's grim patience. Then he pushed deeper, past the foundations of the city, down through kilometers of solid rock and ice. His senses touched the network of geomarrow veins, feeling them as a planetary circulatory system, now sluggish and clogged with the cold poison of the fragmentum. He felt the warmth he had injected into the underworld vein, a single, strong beat in a dying heart. And then he reached the core. The Stellaron. It was not a thing. It was a presence. A vast, crystalline intelligence of pure, cold despair. It didn't speak in words. It spoke in feelings, in concepts. It exuded an aura of absolute entropy. A philosophical belief that all things must end, that warmth was a fleeting anomaly, and that the true, final state of the universe was absolute zero. The eternal ease was not just a side effect of its presence, it was a physical manifestation of its will. And he could feel the connection. A thin, etheric cord of sickly violet energy stretching upward from the Stellaron, through the planet's crust, through the foundations of Clippeth Fort, and connecting directly to the mind of Cocolia Rand. He followed the cord. He didn't invade her mind, but observed the flow of information, the poison that dripped into her consciousness. He saw fragmented visions, not his own, but hers, warped by the Stellaron's influence. A vision of Belobog, vibrant and thriving under a blue sky, suddenly consumed by fire from the heavens. An invasion, destruction, the failure of the guardians before her. A vision of the underworld, not as a city of people, but as a festering wound. A source of chaotic infection that threatened to consume the pristine order of the overworld. A vision of Bronya, her own beloved daughter, standing before a horde of shadowy monsters, her hand outstretched to them. Betraying everything Cocolia had built. The Stellaron wasn't just whispering, it was showing her a carefully edited film of her greatest fears, amplifying them, twisting her protective instincts into a paranoid, suffocating control. It had convinced her that the only way to save her people from a fiery death was to lock them in a pristine tomb of ice. The choice she made every day, to sacrifice the underworld for the overworld, to choose order over freedom, was presented to her as the only possible path to salvation. Naruto felt a profound wave of pity for the Supreme Guardian. She was not a monster. She was a prisoner in a cage built from her own love and fear. But as he observed this, the Stellaron became aware of him. The passive, cold despair shifted. A focused, malevolent intelligence turned its gaze upon his watching consciousness. A wave of pure psychic force, a blizzard of absolute hopelessness and existential dread, slammed into him. "You are a fleeting warmth," it seemed to hiss. The thought echoing not in his ears but in his very soul. An error. All things must grow cold. All things must die. Your hope is a lie. Your strength is an illusion. Naruto's own consciousness, a tranquil sea, met the tsunami of despair. He did not fight it. He did not resist it. He simply absorbed it. The despair, the cold, the hopelessness, it washed over him, and his serene mind processed it, understood it, and let it pass through him without leaving a trace. He was the eye of the storm. He had faced the collective hatred of his own world, a being made of pure malice. This cold, nihilistic despair was a lesser thing. "I am Naruto Uzumaki," he sent back, not a thought, but a pure concept, a declaration of his own existence. "I am the will of a world that chose to live. And you are just a scar. And scars can be healed." The Stellaron recoiled, not in pain, but in sheer, alien confusion. It had never encountered a will that could not be broken, a warmth that could not be extinguished. For the first time in centuries, the will of the winter felt a flicker of something other than its own cold certainty. It felt surprise, and in that moment of recoil, Cocolia felt it too. The constant, reassuring whisper of fear in her mind suddenly fell silent. The visions faded. For the first time in years, her mind was her own. And in that terrifying, lucid moment, she saw the truth of what she had been about to do. In her throne room, Cocolia's hand was outstretched towards a control panel on her desk. A single, large, crimson button was uncovered. It was a failsafe, an emergency protocol designed by the first architects. It would reroute a massive surge of raw, unrefined geomero energy, the Stellaron's own power, to the atmospheric regulators in the overworld plaza. The effect would be instantaneous. A flash freeze, encasing everything in the plaza in a thick layer of ice. It would end the protest, silence the dissent, and make an example that would not be forgotten for a generation. It was a monstrous, horrific act, but the Stellaron had convinced her it was necessary. The only way to save the city from the chaos Bronya had unleashed. Her finger hovered inches from the button. Her face was a mask of cold, fanatical resolve. And then, Naruto made contact. The whispers in her head vanished. The visions shattered. The cold, reassuring certainty was replaced by a deafening, terrifying silence. And in that silence, she saw what she was doing not through the filter of the Stellaron's fear, but through her own eyes. She saw Bronya in the crowd. She saw the faces of her citizens. She saw the little girl with the flower. A strangled gasp escaped her lips. Her hand recoiled from the button as if burned. What was she doing? The sheer horror of the act she had been about to commit washed over her. But the Stellaron was not so easily denied. It could no longer whisper, not while Naruto's consciousness was a shield around her mind. So it chose a more direct method. The cord of violet energy connecting it to Cocolia flared violently. It bypassed her conscious mind entirely and seized control of her body. Her hand, moving with a jerky, unnatural motion, shot back towards the button. Her eyes widened in horror as she fought against her own muscles, a prisoner in her own flesh. "No," she cried, her voice a strangled plea. Her finger slammed down onto the button. In the plaza, alarms blared across the overworld, a piercing, deafening shriek. Massive vents in the plaza floor, vents that were normally used for air circulation, began to glow with a terrifying, blue-white light. A wave of intense, unnatural cold rolled across the square, instantly freezing the moisture in the air into a thick, glittering fog. The crowd screamed, a wave of pure panic erupting. "It's the failsafe. She's going to freeze us all." A former architect in the crowd shrieked in terror. Seal reacted instantly, her body moving before her mind had even caught up. "Everyone, run! Get back to the elevator. Now!" she roared, her voice cutting through the panic. She grabbed the little girl who had given Branya the flower and thrust her into Oleg's arms. "Go!" Branya was frozen for a single, horrified second, her mind unable to comprehend the scale of her mother's betrayal. Then her training, her resolve, kicked in. Seal is right. Evacuate. Orderly. Move towards the transit station. She commanded, her voice ringing with the authority she had been born to wield. But it was too late. The cold intensified, and the ground began to crackle, a web of frost spreading out from the vents with terrifying speed. They were all going to die. And then, a golden light descended from the heavens. It wasn't a beam or a blast. It was more like the sun itself had decided to rise in the heart of Belobog's cavern. Naruto appeared in midair above the center of the plaza, his white haori billowing around him, his body radiating a palpable, golden aura of pure, life-giving warmth. He looked not like a man, but like a demigod from an ancient myth. He didn't speak. He simply spread his arms wide. The golden aura exploded outwards from him, forming a vast, translucent dome of shimmering, warm energy that completely enveloped the plaza. It was a perfect hemisphere of light, a golden shield against the coming winter. The wave of absolute zero cold slammed into the dome. It was not a physical impact, but a collision of concepts. The absolute will to freeze versus the absolute will to live. The blue-white energy of the Stellaron clawed at the golden shield, causing it to ripple and shimmer. But it did not break. Inside the dome, the temperature remained not just survivable, but comfortable. The encroaching frost on the ground evaporated into steam where it met the edge of the golden light. Naruto floated at the apex of the dome, a silent, golden guardian, holding back the apocalypse with nothing but the force of his own will. Below, the entire population of the plaza, overworld and underworld alike, stared up at him, their faces a mixture of terror, relief, and profound, earth-shattering awe. They were witnessing a true miracle, a power beyond their wildest comprehension. Seal looked up, her heart pounding in her chest, her cynical worldview completely shattered. Branya stared, tears streaming freely down her face, at the man who had shown her a better way, now saving them all from the mother she had loved. In Clipith Fort, Cocolia, released from the Stellaron's direct control, collapsed to her knees, staring at the golden dome on her viewscreen with eyes full of horror and a dawning terrible understanding. She saw not a threat, but a savior. And she saw herself for what she had become, the monster in her own story. The lines had been drawn. The city's fever had broken, revealing the true sickness beneath. And as Naruto held back the artificial winter, he knew the confrontation had just begun. The whispers were over. Now, the storm would rage. Chapter 5 End. The end. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.